Welcome, welcome. Thanks for being here. My name's Susan Lightfoot-Schemp. I'm the co-director of the Wallace Center and steward of the Food Systems Leadership Network. And we are working in partnership with Andy Fisher and Emma Bliss from the Institute for Social and Economic, ISED, Institute for Social and Economic Development Solutions. They are the lead on the Community Food Project's Technical Assistance Grant. We're a partner of theirs, and we're co-hosting this series in the effort to just support folks as you're putting together your applications for this year's Community Food Project's competitive grant proposal program. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of what we're up to today, a little Zoom housekeeping, and then we're going to get into it. Just covered that so we can keep going. Just a couple quick Zoom housekeeping things. Please rename yourself and just make sure your first name is there and add your pronouns if you like so we don't accidentally misgender you. We just ask that folks remain on mute for everyone's benefit throughout the call, though we will have some time for conversation and Q&A at the end of this session. So stick around and hopefully we'll be able to hear some of your voices during that time too. If you can, turn on your camera. We'd love to see you. Love seeing faces, especially as we're, in this virtual world. It can seem weird just talking to little boxes with names in them. So appreciate you adding your camera if you're willing, but also totally understand if you're on the move and you just are listening in and or don't feel like being on camera today. That's totally understandable too. Use that chat to ask questions, to add your own tips and tricks. This is a very resourceful community of people, and we all have something to offer. There's a lot of collective knowledge in this room today. So if there's something that comes up that you're thinking that could be a great tip or offering to the rest of the group, please share it in the chat. And also just asking for folks to keep the AI bots in check. It's kind of tricky managing those sometimes. And so particularly when we get to the Q&A section, we would just ask those of you that are using AI assists to please turn them off so that people can feel comfortable sharing their questions. And we will stop the recording for the questions section so that we can just be really candid and honest with each other during that time. All right, so quickly what we're going to cover today, we are getting into the nitty-gritty of the proposal development process and the application submission. We've got very seasoned CFP advocate here with us, Andy Fisher. He's been tracking this program since its very beginnings and he and Emma both have gone through the new RFA and really identified the changes in the program, changes in the application this year. So you're in good hands in learning about the sections of the proposal and tips and tricks for each of the section. Andy's also going to cover some common pitfalls, like what could get you thrown out, like from the beginning of your application submission. So how to avoid those things. And we're also going to hear from a couple of previous reviewers, so peers of ours who have served as grant reviewers for the Community Food Projects program, and they'll be sharing some of the red and green flags that they were looking out for when they did proposal reviews. So hopefully that'll help you as you're putting together your applications to avoid some of those things or make sure that you're incorporating those green flags. And then we'll also cover matching funds, which is always, a great fun topic, and just general hints and recommendations for the application process. So that's the plan for today. And quickly, I'm going to hand it over to Emma just to give a recap of the first session that we had 3 weeks ago, before we get into today's content. So
Great.
Emma,
Thanks,
take it
Susan.
away.
So I think probably many of you went to the first part or you registered and you maybe watched the recording, but maybe helpful to have a little overview. So we did some basic overview of the grant. You can see the two planning grant and implementation grants on the screen. And we talked about program goals. So the purpose of this grant is to look at the food system holistically to address the needs of low-income people and increase food security. And we laid all that forward so that we could get you thinking about if this is a good fit for you, if this program is the right fit for the work that you're doing. Are you eligible as an entity firstly? Do you have an existing project? Andy spoke to the the sort of no-no of just inventing a project out of nowhere for this funding? Do you have something that is already developing that would be a good fit for this? And then does it meet the program goals? Is it addressing the needs of a population that you feel like is in need of sort of holistic food access work? And really importantly, we talked about how to determine your capacity and your readiness for this grant. Do you have collaborators that are in place that you feel like would work with you on what you want to do? Have you thought about matching funds? Is that something that's going to be doable for you? It is 100% match, which is a challenge for many people, but do you have that in place? Is that going to be a reach for you? And then administrative systems in place. We talked about, there's a lot of work that goes into writing this grant. It's a hard process. Do you have the system in place to effectively do that? And then if you receive the funding, are you able to track it and do the reporting and have the deliverables that you are needing to have in the end? The answer may be no, and we really wanted to get you thinking about that in case maybe it's not a good fit and we don't want you to get into something that maybe is not right for you. We were also joined by a few past and present Community Food Project grantees. So if you want to hear some of their insight, I didn't summarize it here because I think it was really kind of in-depth and specific. And so I encourage you to watch the first recording and hear what they have to say. I think they also maybe shared their contact information or at least their organizations, so you can get a little more info on them. And I'll also say that we will send out this recording and the last recording to registrants. So I think it's great to share this with maybe colleagues as you're working on this grant. And this is a very brief summary of what we talked about. So I think you'll get even more from the recordings. So I'm going to pass it back over to Andy.
Okay, so before I'm going to go through a number of different things about this grant proposal. And the first one is, even before you get started with a grant, you have a few things you have to do. The first thing you have to do is you have to register with SAM.gov. SAM stands for System for Award Management. So to do business with the government, you need to get what's called a UEI, or Unique Entity Identifier. It's in lieu of a DUNS number. It's a 12-character number that unique to your organization. Takes about a week or two to get, is what they tell you. Sometimes it's a little bit quicker. In that process, you have to identify what's called an eBiz point of contact, which is somebody who is responsible for doing business with the government. Typically your executive director or finance director or somebody who's got that bailiwick. So once that is done, once you get that UEI, then you can register with grants.gov. And that is immediate. You can create that registration immediately with grants.gov. They have the eBiz point of contact has to use the email address that they were assigned that they used in the SAM process. And they can then start to delegate roles. They can delegate roles to the person, what's called the AOR, or Authorized Organizational Representative. And I'm sorry for all these terrible government acronyms. The AOR is the person who is responsible for turning in the grant proposal. So not anybody can do that, which you can understand you'd want that control. And then that person or the AOR can assign what's called workspace manager responsibilities. So people who can work on the grant, who can fill in the forms, who can attach things, but not necessarily the person who can hit the submit button. So that process is immediate. The SAM process can be a week or two. Once that's done, you can download the RFA. You can start working on it. I suppose you could download it even prior to getting all this stuff done, but then you can start working on it. And we encourage you to use the request for applications as almost as your Bible, essentially. You need to read it over and over and over to understand what's required in the grant proposal. It's 30-odd pages, and it can be quite dense. We also have a series of resources for you that Emma will go through at the back end of this webinar. We have FAQs, one of which is not up yet. We're getting NIFA approval on it. Grant writing, we have 2 grant writing guides that are in the process of also being revised because USDA has revised the RFA substantially. Checklist, timelines, a summary, and we also have videos that you can look at. to help you fill out various forms. Okay, next. Okay, so I'm not going to read over, I'm going to try not to read over the slide, but this is the content of the grant proposal. And includes, I guess I'm going to read over, your basic proposal narrative, 15 pages, a budget narrative, a project summary, which has to be a different form than the proposal narrative, letters of support. I believe it's up to 5 they allow. USDA has now made a logic model optional. You do not have to do it. We recommend you do it, but it is optional. A data management plan at numerous forms, as always. You can attach your resumes or what they call bio sketches, resumes or CVs. I believe they can be no more than 2 pages in length. And if you've submitted a grant proposal previously, you have to attach something that's called response to previous reviews. And if you've gotten a previous grant before, you also have to do a 1-pager on the results from that prior grant. And then there's your appendices, which can be things like maps, graphs, other supporting documentation, I believe up to 7 pages that you can submit as part of it. So as you can see, I mean, it's a substantial document. You're talking 50 to 100 pages. I've seen grant proposals that are over 100, but USD has tried to rein that in a little bit. Okay, so the next part I want to go over quickly, actually in some detail, is the narrative contents. Again, USDA just in the recently revised RFA, they changed this substantially and hadn't been really changed in more than a decade. I don't even remember the last time this was substantially changed, but this year they've made a couple, they've rearranged things, and they've made a couple of significant changes that I'd like to go over with you. The first section, and these are all mandatory sections, you need to label your grant proposal with these headers. They're all listed in the RFA. Unfortunately, there is not a section that describes what's in these under these headings, but if you look later in the request for applications towards the back, you'll see evaluation criteria, which will give you a sense of what they're looking for. So in the first section, proposal goals and objectives in alignment with the Community Food Project's competitive grant program, with the program itself. They don't, first of all, USDA used to give you page recommendations of how you break up your pages. They don't anymore. So these numbers are my own kind of quick take on it. And, we'll see how this plays out. So this is, to me, is a 3 to 4 page document. And again, this is 1.5 spaced 11, no bigger than 11 point, or no smaller than 11 point font. And they have specific fonts that they ask you to use. So this section includes a few things. You want to get a few things done in this section. The first one is you want to describe your project goals and objectives. What are you trying to accomplish? You're trying to improve access to food in your neighborhood, and this is how you're going to do it, through these, doing these activities. You want to describe your activities to meet those goals. So talk in depth about the gardens, the farmers markets, the CSAs, the farm to school projects, whatever it is that you're doing to accomplish your objectives. Describe in some detail again what those look like and how you're going to get there. Then you're going to need to describe how do your goals relate to the community food projects. And the new thing about this year is that USDA mandates that you choose a goal from there's a list of short-term goals and a list of long-term goals in addressing food insecurity, essentially. And so you need to identify one short-term goal and one long-term goal. So in this section, you need to state which goals in both those categories your proposal is addressing, and how, ideally, not just bullets, but how you're doing that. And then also you need to talk about how do your activities address long and short-term food insecurity. So it's not enough just to be providing charitable food distribution to somebody to address their immediate needs. There needs to be a long-term solution. And likewise, you can't just say, we're building up the local food system and we're supporting local farmers and building their capacity to meet the need at some point in the future. There needs to be a short-term goal around addressing food insecurity. So you need to do both. Okay, so that's, again, that's a substantial amount of work. The next section is what's called proposal significance and relevance, and it's essentially talking about the community in which you're working. Again, your project needs to be situated in a low-income community, so you need to document how it is so. What are the indices of poverty, of free school lunches, of obesity, of food insecurity that are in your community, and you talk a little bit about what it's like in that town. Where is it? For a reviewer who's not familiar with your community, let them know why you're working in that community, and then also how does your proposal relate to that community. If this is a neighborhood that has, that's suffering from food apartheid, that has no supermarkets, grocery stores in it, then your efforts to bring in a co-op, for example, maybe are really relevant. So why have you chosen, or why has the community chosen this project to be situated in this area? Make those connections for the reviewer. The next section is new, and it's inclusion of food insecure community members. This used to be embedded in a previous section. USDA is wanting to have you tease this out. They're looking for a page, maybe 2 pages, talking about how are you engaging food insecure residents, low-income residents in your community in this project? How have they chosen it? How have they designed it? How are they operating it? How are they evaluating it? So this is really, I'll get into this later, but this is one of the most common pitfalls that grant proposals run into. They have insufficient community involvement. They tend to be very top-down, or they tend to be too top-down. USDA is really forcing applicants to think through clearly this process of community engagement. The next section is also newish. It's revised. Timeline, data management, and evaluation. You want to cover a few things here. You want to cover a timeline. You want to include an activity table of 2 to 3 pages based upon milestones and how you're going to accomplish those activities, who's going to do them, when are they going to happen, what is a milestone for each activity. You want to talk about your evaluation plan. You want to talk about what are you measuring, who's going to measure it, how are you going to track outputs, how are you going to identify results, what are your indicators, how are you going to take those lessons learned from your process evaluation and incorporate them back into your project. And then also, again, going back to that inclusion of food insecure community members, what's the participation of community members in that evaluation? Is it something that's being done to them? Or are they involved in some way in participating in that evaluation in a more of an actor role rather than an acted upon role? And then the third piece that you want to accomplish in this is talking about your data management practices. You have to do a data management plan. So this is talking about how do you manage data within the organization, within the project? How are you tracking the individuals that are participating, the outputs that you're doing? There's numerous resources on this online. We have them on our website, I believe, and we can share them with you. So you can take a look on how to do a good data management plan. USDA is, again, lifting up the importance of this process. You do not have to do a logic model, like I said, but this is where your logic model would reference back into your evaluation and your proposal goals and objectives as well. Organization description, your organizational capacity and experience. They want you to discuss your organization. Who are you? What is your experience in the community? What is your experience in doing the type of work that you're proposing? Who are your partners? And why are they well suited to be working with you? What role do they have in your project? The qualifications of the PD and the key personnel. This is, again, a section that's been teased out a little bit. Specifically talk about who are the project directors for the program, what are the qualifications for running this program, and not just that you have some letters behind your name, but also how have you been engaged in this type of work before. And USDA specifically lifts up traditional and indigenous knowledge, lived experience as a qualification for being a PD. And then finally, sustainability. The purpose of this program is that it's a one-time infusion of federal funds. It's supposed to continue beyond your 3 or 4 year grant horizon. What are you thinking about at this time period about how this project is gonna continue beyond that period? Are you identifying certain funding that's going to happen? Are you building in a revenue generation model into it? Are you going to pass this project on to institutions that will carry it on? Just saying we'll figure it out and we'll raise the money isn't going to fly. You need to be more thoughtful and build that sustainability into the structure of the program. I want to lay out what happens if you don't follow the rules. And we just had a conversation with NIFA staff a few days ago in which they were very adamant about whereas they used to be much more lax about the rules, they're cracking down. So I want to give you some ideas on how they're cracking down and how not to get yourself thrown out. Because it happens every year. It happens to a lot of grantees, a lot of applicants that get thrown out. So that means their proposal does not even get reviewed. So you put in all this work and USDA just throws it into the trash can essentially and won't send it on to reviewers. So the first one is what happens all the time is that people turn in proposals late. 5:01, it's due at 5 o'clock. 5:01 does not cut it. They will not take excuses. It doesn't matter that you had a hurricane, that your power went out, that Comcast screwed up. Doesn't matter. You need to turn it in on time. People will often leave out, they'll make a mistake and they'll leave out a critical part like the summary or the narrative. They'll forget to attach it. Don't do that. If you have discrepancies, you'll have a budget form and you'll have a cover form. If there's discrepancies in those, if you change one but you forgot to change it in the other, you'll get thrown out. If you make attachments that are that are not PDFs, that are Word documents or Google Docs or Excel spreadsheets, whatever, they will throw your proposal out. Everything has to be a PDF. And that's because their system cannot read it unless it's a PDF. So they won't even know that it exists. It'll be invisible to them. They'll go, it's missing. They'll toss it out. There is a 15-page limit for the narrative. If you go to 16 pages, if you go to 15.5 pages, you're in trouble. It will get thrown out. The amounts that you can ask for are very clear. It's a minimum of $25,000 for a planning grant, a maximum of $50,000. A minimum of $125K for a regular grant, up to $400,000. If you ask for $401,000, if you ask for $99,000 for an implementation grant, they will throw it out. If you make it single spaced instead of 1.5 space, if you use 10-point font instead of 11-point font because you're trying to cram it all in, those are all no-nos as well. And then finally, if your entity is not eligible, you have to show a proof of eligibility. You have to attach your nonprofit letter or registration or your tribal entity registration, whatever, I don't even know what document that would be. But if you have to prove that you're from an eligible entity. And if you're not, if you're from an S Corp, if you're an individual, they will throw it out. Okay. So sorry to be like the harsh the bummer on that, but just follow. Basically, you really have to follow the rules. You have to follow the rules to a T, or you're wasting your time. Just to be honest, and what's the point?
Hey, Andy, I'm just going to quickly
Yes.
just reiterate that the common pitfalls is like if you do XYZ. On the last one, it was a little confusing. There's some question in the chat. Maybe just go back,
Sure.
Emma, quickly, just so we can make that really clear. So if you turn it in late, that's a good way to get yourself thrown out. If you don't make it a PDF, then that's a way to get yourself thrown out. If you go longer than 15 pages, so that's a way to just interpret this slide. We'll send these out to everybody afterwards as well.
Yeah, sorry. And I was doing this in a way of, it's not how to get yourself included, but it's like, these are the top 10 ways to screw up, essentially. Okay, so what are common pitfalls? let's say you follow the rules to a T, right? You get your proposal in through the system. It gets sent out to reviewers. Your proposal is going to be reviewed by 3 individuals. They are your peers. They are people who are working in the field, and we're going to hear from a few of them in a minute. But these are some of the, again, common ways that grant proposals fail, based upon conversations that I've had with reviewers and with NIFA. And the first one, the first one is really the number one reason why grant proposals don't get funded is that old maximum of nothing for us without us. There has to be significant community participation. It cannot be that project that, my analogy is that it's a UFO, that it just plops into a community and you're gonna do this work onto them. You've got to document how the community's at the center of the project and how they're participating in a meaningful way. If you don't have a credible sustainability plan, in other words, if you don't really think about how this is going to be a one-time infusion of federal funds, and you're just like, we'll raise the money later. If you don't give confidence to the reviewers that there's some continuity beyond this grant proposal, you will get marked down for that. If your proposal is not achievable, your reviewers are your peers. They know what's achievable. They've done similar work to you. So they know if you're blowing smoke. So you have to be real. You have to keep it within the realm of ambitious but doable. If your budget is not realistic, if you ask for salaries that are outrageous, if you ask for salaries that are too low, if you don't have enough money in there for staff time, if all you ask for is equipment but not staffing to implement the project, if you're throwing all your money to a communications consultant to do social media outreach for you, but you don't have money for the other things that you need, if your budget is not really realistic in terms of the scope of your work, that is also something you're going to get marked down for. If there's inconsistencies, and what I mean by that is, I've written gobs of proposals. I'm editing them until the last minute. You've got to go back and make sure that your budget lines up with your cover form, that lines up with your logic model, that lines up with your proposal narrative. If you're saying you're doing 3 workshops in one place, but you've got a budget for 6 in the budget narrative, that's a challenge. Reviewers aren't going to know what you're wanting to do. And this is one of those common mistakes that just comes out of doing things in a rush and doing things at the last minute. So you've got to leave yourself time at the end to cross-check and to read through everything a few times to make sure that it's all lined up. If it's charity-oriented, this is a program about building self-reliance. It's not about building a new food pantry or staffing a food bank or, that endless task of giving away free food. Many grantees will incorporate some form of free food giveaways or some form of food recovery. But at the same time, they have to be part of a project that builds self-reliance, that has some entrepreneurial components, that has some economic development element to it. That essentially improves the long-term conditions, the long-term food security conditions in a community. If there's confusions about outcomes, you'll get marked down. And what I mean by that is that, just to give you an example, I guess, a goal is a verb statement. It's, just one that I came up with quickly, is to improve access to healthy food for the 1,000 residents of the Beetlejuice nursing home. An objective is how you accomplish that goal, to process the surplus produce from the Springfield Farmers Market into meals for distribution to the Beetlejuice nursing home residents. And that outcome would be increased consumption of fruits and vegetables by Beetlejuice residents through weekly meal drops. It's a result of what you're working towards. Where we see trouble in this is when people conflate outcomes and outputs. When they say, that distribution of 100 medically tailored meals to the Beetlejuice nursing home residents is an outcome. It's not. It's an output. So that will also get you marked down. And then, also something that happens all the time is that people don't use their grant proposal space wisely. You've got 15 pages. If you put 8 pages into describing your community and don't leave yourself enough time to talk about the project itself, you're shortchanging yourself. So, I did include some guidelines. Those are just guidelines, but you want to think judiciously about how you're going to use your space to describe your project, and don't overweight yourself and shortchange yourself in another place.
Right. Thank you, Andy. It's super helpful. And I know I want to come back to the old goals, objectives, outputs, and outcomes, but we can do that in a minute. I know we've got a couple of people online. Rachel, I see you, and I think Jim and a couple other people. So folks that have been previous reviewers of the Community Food Projects grant program. I would love to hear from you. So I think we've got Rachel Ward from Farmers Market Fund in Oregon. If you guys want to just unmute, say hi. I don't know if Sharon is here. Sharon Thornberry. Yep, there you are. Hi, Sharon.
Hi,
From Philomath Community Services in Oregon. Thanks
Philomath.
for Philomath. Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Thanks for correcting me. Jim Hanna from Cumberland County Food Security Council in Maine. I think Jim's here also. Yeah, thank you all for being here. Just curious to hear from you, when you were reviewing proposals, what really stood out in a positive way? What were the green flags that indicated that the proposal was really thought out and achievable? What are some of those characteristics of successful proposals? Just jump on in.
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
kick us
thanks,
off.
Rachel.
I wrote notes. I think a lot of what Andy said really resonated with me from when I was a reviewer, but really incorporating community input at every stage of the process was something that I looked for. So not just at the beginning of your proposal, there was input that said there was demand for this program, but also how are you involving the community in the implementation of your project and the evaluation? How are the results getting shared back with the community? And how is it a reiterative process was really important. And then having those longstanding relationships, having that reputation in the community, like Andy said, it not being a UFO project of flying in. I really like that analogy. And then just really having a project that focuses on addressing the root causes of food insecurity. Andy also kind of mentioned that, but so something that was not just food distribution focused, but was really focused on, addressing some of the bigger systems that go into why food insecurity exists in your state and your community. And having oftentimes the strongest proposals had kind of multi-pronged approaches where they were doing some addressing of immediate needs, but then also some building of sustainable systems that would create a more robust and equitable food system. So those were the main things for me.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And don't we all want to be in Rachel's pantry? That looks like a very abundant place to be.
I wish this was my pantry, but
Sharon, how about you? What stood out for you as green flags when you were a proposal reviewer?
Well, one of the things for me was just making sure that it was believable that they were actually going to involve low-income people. So if I saw that in the proposal and could believe it, that was a good thing. If it was clear, if it was succinct, but still told me the story, I thought was really important, because it was very easy for it to end up, if people are grabbing at straws to try to make it fit the guidelines, you could pretty much tell that. So anything that was clear and succinct and made me believe that this was the kind of, that they had the right intention and they were going to meet the purpose of the grant, that was a good thing. Andy said a lot already. If I saw living wage salaries, that was important, because all too often, and this was often a discussion in our panels, we saw people who were not paying living wage salaries, and they actually thought that was a plus. They thought that was a good thing. They were going to save money by paying lower wages, and that just is not consistent with the grant. especially if you're working with low income people and you're going to have them in there, you have to pay a living wage salary. So that was always important. And a discussion, not just and regionally, you know, so that we thought for like, if you're in New York City and you tell me you're going to pay people the minimum wage, that's not going to work. So actually seeing that people were intending to pay living wage salaries made a difference.
Those are great points, Sharon. And I think, you know, just remembering that the budget is really where you show your values, and folks that are equity centered, community driven activists and organizers know that. And they're going to be looking at the budget for your values, how that's actually showing up. So it's a really, really good point.
Well, and too often with charity-based organizations that decide to write this, and this is something I see across the board, as I've done this work over the last 3 decades, charity-based organizations think that they should pay lower wages. And that's not, I mean, the trend is changing, but it's still changing pretty slowly.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for raising that. And yeah, Chuck was just seconding that our budgets represent our values. Jim, how about you? What are the green flags for you?
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in. I think Sharon and I have sent a couple of the same panels. But I'll try to say something that hasn't been said. I think Andy, I'll touch on some of the things that Andy referred to in the disqualification and pitfalls. But I think the greenest light for me is seeing that it's coming from the community, that it is led by community members, that are people who have, you know, lived experience of struggles of food insecurity, and you can read that in their narrative, and that have begun, if they don't already have a track record of transformational leadership with folks in their community. They're really laying the foundation for community to lead on this. I know there's been a question about entrepreneurial projects. When I hear about an entrepreneurial element to a project, I want to see that it was vetted in the community, that it's something that the community is interested in doing to be entrepreneurs. And if that's the case, then that's a green light for me. A red flag is kind of the flip side of that, which is if I see faux community driven or language that indicates they're doing for the community, or they haven't really engaged the community, aren't really hearing the community's expressed desire for the initiatives that will have an impact in the communities they're working in. So in that can be fairly obvious. I can't say as a reviewer, we've caught that every time. I'm sure there are some that slip through, but you know, if you are portraying yourself as representing the community and you're not, most often we're a pretty savvy crew, and we'll see that, and it won't go very far. And then I have some yellow cards, which are kind of referred to, which is just do the math. I'm the Virgo that says over here you put this number and over here you put this number, and these aren't consistent with, you know, the proposal. So make sure that you cross-check everything that you say you're going to do is consistent with what you put in the budget narrative. I think there's a disqualifier. Andy mentioned that if it's in the 424 form and it's not the same as in the budget narrative, that's an automatic disqualification. But there's subtler ways where some of those numbers aren't consistent and don't add up. So make sure you know what you put in your proposal, and make sure that if you're saying you're going to do this many workshops and you're going to pay someone this much to do it, it's realistic and consistent. So that's the reality piece too. So that's essentially highlights. I know we've got 2 minutes. I could say I could take over and talk for hours on this, but
well, we have
really
a couple more minutes here.
And I'm really grateful for the work that Andy and Hugh and other folks did to create this in 1996. And I've seen huge impacts in this nation, in our food system since it was created. So, one of the things that's been underestimated, is the competitiveness of it. So not a lot of proposals get funded. So even if you have a really great proposal, unfortunately, you may not make the cut because we have 4.8 million and people can ask for as much as 400,000. So we're talking 10, 12, 15 proposals, depending on the balance between planning proposals and full proposals that get funded. So, and we could get as many as 200 applications in one submission season.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. And just highlighting the importance of us advocating for this program and especially for it to grow in the next Farm Bill cycle. It really should be like quadruple at least the size of what it is. So thanks for naming that, Jim, and just how incredibly competitive this is. I think, something that I heard you all say is be really explicit about your values, and about your experience in your community. Remember that people are not really allowed, and I think this is true, y'all, please, check me. You're not allowed to do additional research. As a reviewer, you are supposed to take it for face value. So you don't want to leave anything to chance. Folks aren't going to your website to check you out. You need to really explain yourself. And remember that it is folks like these people that are sharing with us now that are reviewing, and they are looking for those indications that you're legit. So, be really clear about that. Be explicit. Yeah, Sharon. Oh, you're muted, babe. Yep. Sorry for using babe. I
There
am
we
from
go.
Louisiana and we use that a
Right.
lot.
Thank you. But
Ouch. Yeah.
just
Ooh.
making sure that your data makes sense, because people reviewing this are pretty experienced. And I don't know, I don't know who's been on recent review panels, but I'm someone that was working around the country. And so I would look at that and go, wait a minute, what I know about that place, even though I'm not looking it up anywhere, what I know, this doesn't quite fit. And I'm trying to figure out how it all fits. And that's particularly a big challenge if you're working on trying to serve a low income population in a high income census tracts. You need to look for data and things that has documented, and sometimes it's housing data, it's healthcare data that documents the presence of a low income population that you're going to serve to help solidify your position.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would
Rachel.
second that question about like if you're serving low income areas within a high income area. I think it does become, as we're ranking proposals, it becomes a little bit of a like poverty competition of like where is the greatest need and the best proposals. So really making it clear how the communities that you're serving are in need of the services is a very important part of it, especially if you're in a higher income area or have lower poverty or lower food security stats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe for some communities or populations where there may not be that kind of, census data, you might look to see for community food assessments or other like studies or plans that have been created in your community or your region that you can reference. And using those reference points can also be really helpful. All right. Thanks, y'all. We can come back and offer more suggestions and such as we get to the kind of discussion and Q&A, but really appreciate the three of you offering your suggestions and insights there. Thank you. Andy, I think I'm going to pass it back over to you
Okay.
to talk about match.
Okay, very simply, and I'll go over this quickly. The grant proposal does require dollar for dollar match. In other words, if you're asking for $200,000, you have to have $200,000 in non-federal money matched. So that means that if you're getting money from the state or from the city and it was actually a pass-through from the federal government, not going to count. If it's state money, it's generated from state tax revenues or private sector funding, that's totally fine. It can be either cash or it can be in kind. If it's cash, it can be a grant that your organization is receiving for this project. It can be cash that your organization has in the bank. It could be one of your partners is, ponying up some dollars to do this work. That's fine. In terms of in kind, typically people do, the most common use of in kind, I think, is probably volunteer labor. If your people are picking up food from different sources or you volunteer gardeners or whatever, you need to document that and and make an estimation on that. There's an independent sector website you can Google that has the calculation for volunteer labor in your state. $30 an hour is probably about average from my understanding. That in-kind could also be, you get some land that you're gardening on for free. It's a $1 a year lease. The retail value, the fair market value, I should say, the fair market value of that land, of the office space, of whatever that you're getting for free, you can count as match towards your project, as long as it's specifically part of your project, not something unrelated. Again, dollar for dollar. You cannot use program income. And I mentioned this in the last webinar. You can't say we're going to grow $100,000 worth of fruits and vegetables over the course of the project. We're going to count that as match because it's not verifiable. It's projected. USDA has to have all the stuff lined up before they give you the grant, because once they give you that award, they're not taking it back. And it has to, legally, it has to have that match. And it has to be documented. They don't ask you specifically for that documentation at the time of the grant, nor are they going to ask you at the time of the award, but you have to have it in a letter. You don't have to have, they're not going to verify it, but it does have to be documented. Okay. Next. I just wanted to give you a few just general hints, and I think we're going to close out and go to, I think Emma's going to talk after this, if I'm right. Bianca Bachman in the last webinar showed kind of her own work plan for how to get a grant proposal, get the CFP grant proposal done. That was a fantastic idea, and showing your timeline for getting it done, who's going to do it, how you're going to move through the next lesson. You have less than 2 months to submit this. It's due on November 7th. So I don't know, 6 weeks, I guess, roughly. You need to be starting already. I would insist that people start at least 4 weeks ahead of time, if not longer, to get this going. We have a timeline document on our website that you can go check out that gives you a little bit of some guidance on this. Hopefully you already have your grants.gov and your SAM certifications already. You're registered already with them. Read the RFA, read it again and again. It's 30 pages long, 35 pages long. For the most part, the first 20, 25 pages are what you're going to look at. But, there's an incredible amount of detail in there, incredible amount of requirements. Just keep reading that, keep it at your desk and keep reviewing it. I like to use a marker and highlight key passages, just keeps me focused. Follow the instructions to a T. Don't think you're going to get away with not including something or attaching something that nobody's going to notice or not care. Not the case. I encourage people the thing that takes the longest lead time from my perspective is to get letters from your partners and supporters. So start on that process at the beginning of it rather than at the end. Start asking people for those letters. I like to give them a template. I like to give them some language to start with as to what you're asking them to say. Yeah. And then I think the last thing that you do at the grant proposal process, besides reviewing it and reading it, is to write the summary. You have a 250-word abstract of your grant proposal that you need to submit on a separate form. It's easiest if you do that at the end, and you can cut and paste from your grant proposal into a Word document and turn that into a PDF. But you can cut and paste that into a word processing document and pare it down. To me, that's the easiest thing to do. I strongly encourage you to submit it a few days early. Your deadline is November 7th. Don't wait until November 7th. Do it the 4th, the 5th. Do it a couple days early. That way, if there's any problems, you have some time to correct those problems. If you forgot to attach something, you'll notice it and you can resubmit it. Only the last version of your resubmission of any resubmitted documents is going to be read by USDA, but at least you have that opportunity rather than if you do it at 4:59. And you don't have to worry about the technological glitches that just happen all the time. And then finally, again, I think our website's going to be posted on this. Emma's will put it out, can send it out to people as well. But we've got grant writing guides, FAQs, videos, checklist, timelines, other guidance on there. So take a look at that and be in touch with us about questions. And I'll pass it back to Emma so she can talk a little bit more about assistance.
So Andy and I are available to give you one-on-one technical assistance. So that can be in the form of, you have some questions, you just want to email us and we can get back to you. Or if you want to meet with us, one of us, about something deeper about your application, we can do Zooms, we can do phone calls. We generally offer about 2.5 hours per applicant. So it's a fair bit of time to help you with your application. And I think Susan just posted in the chat, that is the link onto the FSLN website. That is our current landing page for our technical assistance. On there is where all of the resources are that we've developed, and therefore some of the required pieces of the application. So I would look through those and see if that might answer your questions, but don't hesitate to email us. I have put my email up here because then I can kind of funnel you to who would be most helpful to answer your questions. And then I'll also say, even if you decide not to apply, or you do and you don't get awarded, or you're waiting for your award, you're still in the community food world and there's still community for you there. So we, with Susan and the Wallace Center and FSLN, we do a community of practice series, which we paused for August in order to do this webinar, but we're going to resume this month, although it's going to be a little different this month. So stay tuned on that. And then next month, it will be completely resumed back to the way we've been doing it, which is around a different topic area. So we have speakers and could be on land access or shared leadership. So definitely stay aware of that, because you are always welcome to join us there. So
For the September Community of Practice, what we're going to do, which would be falling next week, September 25th, we're going to host just an open office hours for the application process. So Andy and I and Emma will just be there kind of taking questions and working through particular challenges that y'all are facing. So if you want to register for that series, you can join us for office hours next week. And it could just be a good place to come and hear other people's questions and such as well. But we'll also get back rolling with our regularly scheduled content in October.
great. Okay, awesome. I'm going to pass it back to Susan, and I'm going to stop recording as we get into our Q&A section.